we can talk about right now, except two things. One is the J&J vaccine and the huge news that came out about that. We'll talk about that later. But right now, I'm honored to be joined by one of my favorite people in the world, and that is my younger brother, Ed Greene, who has been a DA for about 100 years and just had a birthday 2 days ago. Happy birthday, Ed. And a new friend who came to my defense as I was being pummeled on Facebook when I made some comments about Daunte Wright, and that is Kobe Du Bois, who is a criminal defense attorney. So let's talk about a lot of things. Let's talk about your perspective as a criminal defense lawyer and a prosecutor on what happened in Minneapolis. We can also, of course, talk about the Derek Chauvin case. But most importantly, I think, the new news, as if you hadn't heard, is that the officer, the female officer who fired the gun instead of the taser, like WTF, right? Why did that happen? She resigned, and so did the chief of police, which I think is a good move. But, was it purposeful? Was, you're on the force for 25 years and you can't tell the difference between a taser and a gun, right? Let's talk about that. And if it was purposeful, why? And then the other thing is, how do we prevent this shit from happening again, right? I mean, and are there some things that other people are not talking about that I know Kobe and I believe need to be talked about? And that's why he came to my defense as I was being pummeled on Facebook Live. Anyway, so let's start with you, Kobe. What's your take on the Daunte Wright case as a criminal defense lawyer?
Sure. You know what I'll say? Sometimes criminal defense lawyers are in odd positions when it comes to defending police officers, because so much of my work usually is scrutinizing police officers and their work. But here, assuming there's some sort of criminal case, the lawyer side of me wants to figure out how I would also defend this person. But, from my perspective, what I see is, I earnestly believe, watching the video and some of the things that happened there, that this woman probably didn't mean to shoot him, didn't go through some ruse to shoot him with a gun by claiming that she had her taser in her hand. That, to me, seems fairly clear from her behavior, from the way she responded and reacted to it. It felt honest when she said, "Oh shit, I shot him." That didn't feel manufactured. Now, whether or not that should happen, I mean, how does a person mistake a taser for a gun? Do their handles feel different? I've seen some reports out of Minnesota saying, hey, the trigger weight is different. It's different pulling the trigger of a firearm versus your taser. How do you not know what you're holding? I feel like in these situations, police officers are put into very stressful situations. The more stressful the situation, the more likely they are to make a mistake. Does that make it right? Absolutely not. But you try to understand, how could a mistake like this happen? I have also seen reports that this happened before in 2002 in Rochester, which I think is very close to Brooklyn Center. And the Bureau of Apprehension investigated that case where a Sudanese man was shot by a cop who claimed that he thought he was using his taser. No criminal charges were brought in that case, although the city did settle with that man's family, or with that man because he didn't die, for about $900,000. So a case like this has been investigated. I've seen reports that the officers are supposed to have their firearm on their right side, which is her primary hand, and the taser on the other side, so that mistakes like this wouldn't happen. Obviously, that didn't go on here. She seemed to have both of them on the same side of her arm. That seems wrong. It seems like there should have been some additional safeguards in place that would prevent, even if you want to look at this as accident is such a weird word because someone died here, but something that she didn't intend to do but did. Seems like the safeguards were broken. Even if you believe she didn't intend to kill him, something's very wrong here. What that is, we don't have all the facts yet, so it's hard to know.
So do you think she is going to be criminally liable for what she did?
In this environment, it wouldn't shock me. We're obviously in a different world. We're 19 years later from 2002. I think since 2014, police officer shootings officer-involved shootings have taken on a different nature because they are so intertwined with our politics and the things that we care about, earnestly care about. which is police violence and everything that's happened since kind of Trayvon Martin to Michael Brown.
The Care 11 investigation finds the police shooting of Dante Wright is not the first time a Minnesota officer has claimed to have been.
Casey, where did that come from? Is that you, Kobe?
Well, I had that pulled up what I was just talking about, and the audio started while I was talking. Anyway, that's gone now. But yeah,
go ahead.
No, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he's charged, especially given where this happened geographically. I mean, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the folks there to bring charges here. I don't think this doesn't like a murder case, but certainly manslaughter, something in that realm. I'm not a Minnesota lawyer, so I don't know all the what she could be charged for up there. But
well, let's find out. So, Ed Greene, you've been a deputy DA for a long time. You've tried murder cases. You've charged people. You've done plea deals for thousands of people. Is there a crime there? Did that female officer commit a crime, or do you think it's not chargeable and it's just a simple accident?
I think, well, I agree with Casey. This is a politically charged, emotionally charged environment that didn't exist years ago. This is a case that if we were investigating this in Los Angeles County 20 years ago, it would be a reject. It would be rejected. It would be just determined to be, it was an accidental shooting. It was it would be considered a mistake that would be tragic, but understandable, and it would not have been filed. Today, I suspect there's going to be something filed.
Got it. And so,
of course, that's a whole nother conversation, but I suspect something will be filed just because of the environment that we're in. And I also agree with Casey with that. Yes, it's a mistake, but it's a tragic mistake. Obviously, somebody died. It was preventable, or at least it can be prevented in the future. This idea of having the taser on the same side as the gun, that's kind of crazy, because one of the things that a lot of people don't take into account in these kinds of cases, unless you really deal with them over and over for years, like Casey probably has, is that we sit back and do a bit of Monday morning quarterbacking, and we micro-analyze every second, and we have the videos, and we watch this and watch that and say, okay, well, here this person could have done this, here this person could have done that. We tend to discount the massive amount of adrenaline going through the bodies of these police officers, the split-second decision-making that has to go on, and it really is. It's like the quarterback who you say, why did you throw it at that point? And the guy was, because we're watching video in slow motion, and we can make those decisions. So,
well, it could be, using the football analogy, it could be because there were 3 people weighing a total of 1,000 pounds that were about to throw them to the ground and break their body. Right. I mean, it's hard to be in that situation. You've gone on police rides in the back of police cars, right? I mean, can you talk about that? And again, not as an excuse, but just these are human beings who are flawed.
Well, in addition to that, you talk about being in police cars. It is kind of a rush and a thrill to just go into the back of a police car and go on patrol, just anybody, because it's a charged environment. Just when you're patrolling and nothing's happening, you're just aware of everything that's going on, and that there could be at any moment something that happens. And then especially when you have an encounter, a stop. I mean, think about it. Even the simplest traffic stop, police officers do have their heart start pumping a little. They just don't know what they're going to encounter. They try to keep it calm. They've been trained, and they try to do the right thing. And this is, by the way, not to excuse any of the things that have happened, especially things like George Floyd, which I've talked about before. I think that we just went way up above and beyond. But
yeah, I want to ask both your opinions on George Floyd, the Derek Chauvin case, in a minute. But go ahead.
Split-second decisions is a different issue. I mean, you have to make a decision, and police officers know that many police officers throughout the years have made the wrong decision and are dead because of that. Okay?
In other words, that they're scared for their own life.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, but before we go further, we got a lot of comments. People are very emotionally charged by this. understandably.
Right.
My dear friend Matt Barnes, the former NBA star, went on Instagram and did an Instagram live last night or this morning, and he had like over 150,000 views already. And he's saying, I was in the NBA a long time. I'm a veteran, just like this police officer was a veteran. I know all the tricks. And he said there's no way in the world someone on the force for 25 years would not know what they were doing, and that he was saying that it was purposeful. Let me read some comments. Terry said, the officer cuffing him was supposed to do so at the back of the car and not at an open door, which is tempting when a person's fight or flight response kicks in. We got to make sure a taser is brightly colored so it is obvious what it is. That's also from Jerry. Kim says, this was not a high stress. Plus, I never saw so much BS coming out of a cop's mouth as she was pushing to antagonize the driver. I want to talk about that. If she cannot tell the difference between a gun and a taser, she should not be a cop. I know the difference by feel, and I am 74 years old. Colleen says negligent homicide, 100% preventable. You want to respond to any of those comments, either of you?
Yeah, I think he was speaking a little bit earlier about kind of what happens in those moments. Houston, where I practiced, had a fairly controversial practice of taking grand jurors and putting them through shooting simulations so that they could get an idea of what police officers are facing. People didn't love that because who knows what's going on during those simulations, and there's a lot of potential for tampering and things that go on. But I think the idea that, okay, I understand where Matt Barnes is coming from, that this officer's been on the force for so long, therefore mistakes would be less likely. That sounds right. I have to remind myself that we live in a country of 300 million people, which means we have so many police officer encounters every day, everywhere across the nation. And we live in a world, social media wise, where if something happens, whether it's in Brooklyn Center or South Carolina, where I'm from, or Houston, where I practice, it's local now to everyone because we're going to get the video immediately. So we're dealing a little bit with the law of averages where, yeah, it'd be very highly unlikely for a 25-year-old or 25-year veteran to make a mistake. But with a certain number of opportunities to do so, it becomes more and more likely that someone does something incredibly stupid or negligent or so forth. And that's something that I try to remember. And the question is, certainly it's preventable. It's almost like medical errors. 25-year doctors aren't expected to leave sponges in patients. With enough surgeries, that will happen somewhere. The question is how to prevent it. And
right.
That's what you think about a lot.
That's a great point, right? I mean, 20 years ago, you didn't have body cams mandated on most police officers, and you certainly didn't have iPhones or Androids that can film all this stuff. So maybe we're not having an increase in the killings of young Black men. Maybe we're just knowing more about them.
Sure.
Right? I mean, does that make sense? Not to excuse it, but there are a lot of people saying, oh my God, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And maybe it's not. What do you guys think?
I don't think it's getting worse. I have known about it. I know in our office, we've had a unit that has investigated and sometimes prosecuted police for 25 years, 30 years. I can't remember when we first started the unit. We had, rollouts where, DAs working in this unit would get called and say, okay, there was a police shooting at 2 a.m. down whatever, you're going to go there, and you go to the scene to try to sort of oversee the investigation, make sure it's being done properly. We've had these for a long time. I mean, of course, I'm in the courthouse right near where the Rodney King situation had one of the first ones, of course, that had a video. It just happened to be somebody pulled out an old, VCR camera from a house nearby. And,
a million years ago, right?
And it seems like, now it's just everybody's got their iPhones. So yes, these things were always happening. And to the point here about the averages and the mistakes, we are dealing with human beings, okay? And absolutely everybody makes mistakes. There are issues on all sides. Yes, many of the times what you find is somebody is resisting, somebody is reaching for a gun or what appears to be a gun, okay? And and there are all sorts of gray areas. And one of the things that I find is that sometimes these things are seen too much in black and white. I believe police officers are at fault sometimes, maybe many times, but to what degree? And then on the other side, you have people who are encountering the police, they're being detained, they're being pulled over, whatever, who are also contributing to this by either resisting or holding a gun or not, whatever. Maybe there's drugs, maybe there's mental illness. There's always explanations on both sides, but there's an awful lot of gray areas. And then, like I said before, all these encounters have everybody charged up. Everybody is in a kind of hyped up state. And so that contributes also to mistakes happening, especially when it's split-second decisions.
So I'm going to, Kobe, go ahead.
Sorry, I just had one thing to add. Just bringing it back to this situation specifically, and some of the comments spoke to this. There were some weird things that happened here. Rarely, and someone brought this up, rarely do I see in my cases my clients be handcuffed right there beside the door. In fact, there's Supreme Court precedent on searches incident to arrest, because often officers take the person to the back of the car, as was mentioned. There's a reason for that. It's because it's a safer environment in which to conduct that search. There's no longer an issue of someone reaching into their car to grab a gun or whatever.
Right.
So it was very odd to me that the search was, or excuse me, the arrest, the handcuffing was done right there beside the car. That didn't make any sense. He got out and was immediately handcuffed. And then I don't understand what the officer ended up doing. The shooting was doing when she was reaching kind of into his, she sort of reached into his side. I don't know what she was doing there, what the purpose of that was. That kind of set off the whole thing and gave the guy an opportunity to, in my mind, fairly clearly pull away from them and try to get in the car and drive off. Now, everybody will say, and they're right, evading from the police is not a capital crime, certainly should not result in death. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I defend lots of people who get charged with evading, and fortunately, most of them, have ended up okay. But I have to remind my clients sometimes, particularly they'll call me. I get clients who'll call me and say, "Hey, I'm being pulled over. I've got a pending case. What do I do?" First thing I tell them is, "Hey, you're going to remain calm. You have my card. You're going to give them my card. I'll get you out of this in a month. But right now, your job is to survive this encounter. Don't put that officer in a position where he will make a mistake. Just like, just like you wouldn't go pet a pit bull that you didn't know on the nose, because that pit bull might be dangerous. You have to learn at some point that these officers are charged up. They are relatively jumpy sometimes. And is that right? No. Is that taking the responsibility off of them? No. But what can you do to survive that encounter? Don't give them reason to hurt you.
Exactly. And that's where you came to my defense on the Facebook post. Let me read a great comment from Kevin, one of our favorite fans here. He said, "I make a mistake when I buy parsley instead of cilantro." Great comment, Kevin. Taking a life shouldn't be looked at as something of the same degree. Why are we looking at percent of chance of error like a lottery? Let's all roll the dice while we're driving. Here's the point. First of all, I want to know, why was this such an emergency, high intensity situation when you had this kid? He wasn't doing 120. He wasn't drunk driving. We don't even know what the misdemeanor warrant that he had. That's one. But the bigger issue, and I want to come back to that, is how do we communicate, especially to African-American men who absolutely are more likely to have problems? There is more likely to be systemic racism. There's more likely to be violence that happens in that interaction. How do we communicate them to do what Chris Rock, he did a beautiful video about 10 years ago saying, here's how not to get in trouble, shut the fuck up, put your hands on the wheel and comply. In other words, if the cop's doing something bad to you, just, film it, do whatever, sue them later, but you have zero chance of having this work to your advantage if you resist, or especially if you try to evade. So, and I got pummeled by victim shaming, but we're all lawyers, and it's fun to have a conversation with, among three lawyers. I just look at the facts, and the facts are, if you look at so many of these high-profile cases, the victims were not complying. And people say, oh, you're being naive. Why should Black people have to comply? It's true. And the question I want to ask you, Ed, is how many white people who don't comply, who resist arrest, who try to evade the scene, how many of them get screwed up and maybe even also killed?
Many. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I did look them up some time ago. And what I found at that point was that there were, when it comes to police shootings and killings of suspects, let's call it, or people that are detained, that the numbers are actually higher for white people. Now, of course, yes, the population of white people is significantly higher. So I don't know what the percentages are. If somebody told me the percentages are that, there's a higher percentage of Black people or Hispanic or whatever that are being killed by police officers as a percentage of their population, okay, that may be true. But it is not exclusively a problem of people.
How perfect. Is that in Texas or in Los Angeles, that siren?
That's right. That is right here. I'm in the courthouse in San Fernando, and we have something going on a little bit here.
Well, perfect sound background. I love that. Makes it seem like a CSI episode or something. So I just want to drill down on that, Ed. Sure. So you are saying that in your 30 plus years as a DA, you have seen many, many white people who have gotten screwed up, gotten killed, gotten beaten up because they did exactly what we have seen in these high profile young black men cases.
Yes, I have. Yes, many. Absolutely.
Can you give us an example of one? Think about it. We can come back to you.
Let me think about one, because it's I'll have to think about that one. But yeah, there are definitely people of all races that have had that happen. Now, I do not, by saying that, I do not mean to discount in any way the difference between the experience of people of color, I would say, because I'm working in an area that has a high percentage of population that's Hispanic. I've also worked in areas where there's a higher percentage of Black residents and all. So I'm not discounting that at all. I know that there is a difference. I know that there is systemic unconscious bias. I mean, we go through training on this now, and I know that exists. And there's a higher sensitivity that police officers have when they are encountering people who are, let's say, don't look like them, okay? Or, I know that happens. Of course I know that happens. But again, this is not an area where it is all or nothing. We have plenty of people who are white people that, drugs, lots of meth problems. You get the people, and they are, running from police. They get stopped, and they get encounters, and they fight and resist, and they get killed. It does happen as well. There's a lot of like a good guys versus bad guys mentality with police officers. And
explain that. What does that mean?
Okay, so the police tend to they start thinking of themselves as kind of a club, like a law enforcement club, and they're like, we're the good guys. We're out there trying to protect. We're trying to enforce the law. And there's a tendency for their mentality to start to go towards, hey, they are with us. They're law-abiding people. They're the good guys, and they're the dirtbags. They're the criminals. They're the other guys. They're the ones who are not. And they tend to start to see the world a bit like that, in sort of black and white. And it's good guy, bad guy. When they encounter people, their sense is pretty soon they can sort of figure out, is this a person that's sort of a good guy or a bad guy? And so that's not to say there isn't some racial component that overlays that sometimes with some officers, maybe not. but there's also just this good guy, bad guy. You know, he's a dirtbag, he's a criminal, he's a good guy, and so that's where I think the gray area comes in. You know, I don't mean to deny that there is a racial component out there. Obviously, yes, but there's also this other thing. Are you law-abiding or are you not?
Let me ask a question, and both of you can answer. What percentage, and I know, you know, you're not talking from stats that you may have in front of you right now, but from your experience, what percentage of the people who are being apprehended, who get screwed up, right? They get beaten up, they get tossed around, they get killed, right? What percentage would you say are related to their resisting arrest or trying to evade the scene?
Say, speaking from my perspective, if I had to put a percentage on it, maybe flip a coin, maybe 50% of the time something happens that starts the ball rolling down the road. And I want to, that the suspect or defendant, whoever is responsible for it. Now, sometimes that may be a small thing. You know, it may be a small indiscretion in the beginning of the encounter that sends that down a path, and the police officer had 6 or 7 opportunities to de-escalate the situation and chose not to. You know, maybe it's a pulling away in your initial attempt to arrest, or it's refusing to roll down the window, something that just seems so small and insignificant that just starts the encounter in a way that heightens the police officer's sort of sense, almost as Ed's talking about, that you are a bad guy. And once they begin to see you in that way, that frames the entire encounter. And I don't know if that number is right or not, but I'm just kind of speaking the cases that I've seen. You know, because certainly there are people who, and I reviewed a video the other day of a guy who was super nice and gave consent to search, and then all of a sudden, basically out of nowhere, ends up being slammed to the ground and tasered, almost as if I'm trying to figure out what the cop thought he saw, because I'm watching the guy do nothing wrong. So certainly those cases exist, but
and also like what happened in Virginia with that Army lieutenant. Sure. I mean, that seemed to be completely unprovoked.
Yes, those cases exist for sure. I say flip a coin on it from my experience, and that's really only speaking to Houston here, where the police are fairly notorious for using force, frankly.
Ed, what's your take? What percentage of these cases that we see where police have you know, killed someone or beaten somebody up are related to the suspect doing things that perhaps have provoked the police, rather than just, as Chris Rock said, just hanging in there, sucking it up, said, this is going to be uncomfortable, they're going to cuff me, this is not going to be fun, but I'm just going to suck it up and I'll deal with it later if they've done something wrong?
I suspect this is going to be where you're going to get an awful lot of comments streaming through on your Facebook that are not going to be.
I just believe in truth and facts and having intelligent conversation with people who know what they're talking about. So go ahead.
And I can obviously only speak from my experience, but in my experience, it would appear that the vast majority of the cases where we see these, okay, because I don't see them unless they're either on the news or they're brought to our office for prosecution. So it would appear to me that the vast majority, it's hard to put a percentage, but the vast majority, there has been something that has provoked the escalation where the police have then either felt that their life was threatened, so they shot, or whether they did something to try to, you know, detain the person with force, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I think I said to you one time, it's you're going to find in just almost all of these cases that someone is either violently or actively resisting, or they appear to have a gun, or appear to be reaching for a gun or other weapon. Okay. Having said all that, I think that Kobe's point is very well taken. You've taught body language and other communication things at all. We know that there's an awful lot of body language that goes on in the communication when the encounter first starts. And so the sense of whether a police officer is going to be able to sort of relax and feel like, okay, this is going to be a calm encounter, this is going to be peaceful, I don't have to worry, or whether this is going to be something where, okay, this could escalate and my life could be in danger. That can happen in very subtle ways by just the things that a person says, the movements that a person makes, just every little thing. And the police are very, very trained to look for that stuff because it's life and death for them, obviously. So,
well, okay, go into it. In other words, is it true that in the back of the mind of a policeman, even making a routine stop for expired license plate tags, right? That in the back of his or her mind, he's thinking, I may not be able to see my wife and kids again because I have no idea who this person is. I don't know, or are packing, right? They're carrying guns, right? And some of them are obviously concealed weapons. That in the back of a policeman's mind, which is a factor that most of us, as we're walking around society, we don't have to factor in, they stand a chance, a strong chance in their own subjective assessment of being shot because they don't know.
I think about it this way. In most encounters that officers end up having with people, traffic stops being kind of the exception to this, but a lot of times when you are executing a warrant or when you're doing a stop where you think the person may be involved in some serious criminal activity, or even when, some places you can be arrested for small things, the police officer is going into that encounter with the idea that they're going to be taking the freedom of this person away. And that's no small thing, right? I mean, having your freedom taken away is a huge thing. So the idea has to be, what would this person do on the other side to prevent having his freedom taken away? And that is the sort of situation that frames every police encounter with a citizen. And the police, I think, are thinking to themselves, well, if I'm putting this person in jail, which is a horrible thing, taking them from their family, and it causes all these consequences, that person may want to not have that happen, and that frames the mindset there. Now, I think sometimes police officers overdo that. Most people aren't thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, I'm going to be arrested for DWI, therefore my life is over, therefore I need to risk death in order to get out of there. But I can also understand where the police officer is coming from, where he knows that is the sort of drumbeat that frames the encounter between the two people. I think sometimes police officers can overdo that a little bit because I think they see threats occasionally where they are not there. It's easy to understand kind of why that happens, though.
Great. So by the way, if you have any questions for Kobe Du Bois, who is a defense attorney based in Texas, and my brother Ed Greene, who is a DA, please ask, and I'm going to try to get through as many comments as I can. I think this is an important show. Candace has a very important comment, and she says, isn't this kind of like telling a woman that she shouldn't have worn a short skirt because it's asking for rape? How do you respond to that, either of you? It's a tough question.
No, and having prosecuted for years sexual assault cases, child molest cases, etc., I've had to deal with that, and it is for many women, it is really, it's so highly insulting. It's hard for them to even listen to it. The idea that I can't wear something that's nice because I'm asking for it. I mean, seriously. I understand where the question is coming from. I don't really think it is an analogy that fits exactly. And the reason is this, the police are out there to do a job. Okay, they are supposed to enforce the law. Okay, we ask them to do it in a just manner, and we hope they do. And I think most times they do. But again, they're human. Again, they're imperfect. And even the simplest encounter where you just see an expired tag, there have been instances throughout our history where police officers have pulled a car over for that, have walked up to the driver's side window, and have been blown away before the window even opens. I mean, they just stand there and they are just completely blown away because the person in the car was a suspect in a murder. He had a warrant for him, and he's just said, I'm not going down. I mean, that doesn't just happen in movies. So while those are very rare, it is true that a police officer who every single time he's going to walk up to a car, and we're using the traffic stop scenario because you don't have any preparation who this is or what this person is. They are, as quickly as possible, they're inputting all the little visual and auditory clues into their little computer, trying to assess, is this okay? Is this a danger? As they're walking up, they put the hand on the, their belt just in case. They're looking through it. It's the flashlight. They're trying to look through the things, seeing who do they have in there. All the hands on the steering wheel. Is it okay? Because you just never know if you're going to put over hundreds and thousands of people in your career. Yes, almost all of them are going to be fine, but that one, you could be coming upon that one person. So I don't know, to ask a person to just simply comply with this and put your hands out there where the person can see it and just simply say, yes, okay, sure, here's my license and all that. I don't think that's too much to ask, and I don't think it's like putting the person, in this situation where they are somehow, instigating it. At the same time, you know what? There is always room for more training and improvement in how police officers communicate with people that are detained and find ways to tamp it down. And I've seen officers on both sides of the spectrum, some who are incredibly good at it, and I've watched body cam and listened to what they've said, and they are just so excellent at just calming people down and putting a situation.
Right. So will more training, or would better hiring practices to weed out the people who can't do that? Is that a way for us to reduce the number of these incidents?
I think all of the above, all the above. I think it's better procedures. I mean, if we're talking about even just putting, the gun and the taser on different sides and having them marked, and maybe making tasers so that they just feel incredibly different than a gun, having better training, having better, communication abilities, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, all of the above.
Right. So go ahead, Kobe.
I think it's a skill, it's almost like a bedside manner. Some
Right.
doctors are good at it, some aren't. And I've seen cops that are just incredibly gruff, and they turn situations just for unnecessarily antagonistic. They obviously don't have that skill. And I think police departments could do a better job of prioritizing that. Because some people, there's only so much that training you can do. If you're not good at that, you're not going to become great at it. But certainly they could become better through training. I want to address something. It's similar along these lines. You asked sort of how can we communicate to young Black men in particular that their role in this, their role in sort of improving their chances of surviving. To me, I think it starts, and I try to remember this when I'm talking to my clients, it starts with sort of empathy and respect for what they are facing. And never just to say, hey, look, do this and you won't die. Okay, that's not the way I ever try to approach it. I think it's always starting with a little bit, it takes the right approach to this, I think, which is, hey, I see where you're coming from. I understand that as a white guy in Houston with nice hair who's driving a nice car, I'm probably going to get much more benefit of the doubt than you are. Let's start there. Now,
hold on that. I want to read a comment from Colleen,
Sure.
who says, my husband is a white hippie with long hair, and we've been pulled over because of profiling for nothing more than that, for more times than I can remember, right? So it's not just race.
I represent people, here in Houston, white guys, and Ed kind of spoke to this, where these guys have been understood by the local police to be rabble-rousers and troublemakers and drug dealers and drug addicts. And they are not profiled for their race, but they're certainly targeted, harassed, pretextual stops. Hey, I'm pulling you over because you signaled 99 feet instead of 100. Now let me get in here and search the car. Happens all the time. Black folks face a similar situation, but worse in some ways. And I think it's important to remember that. But it's also important to have the conversation that says, hey, look, looking at all of that and understanding that you're facing something that a lot of white folks don't face and something that's particular to you, you have a choice in this. Do you want to take steps and actions that are understanding that the police officer there's no excusing his behavior if he does something wrong and kills you. Everyone understands that. okay, or hopefully everyone will come to understand that. Now, what can you do to get home to your mom, to your wife, to your child, to your job? What can you do to get home? Let's take those steps as well. And that's not because I want to just communicate. It's not because your life matters less or because it's okay what that cop is doing to you. It's just that being a dead victim, you're still a dead victim. So if there's steps that you can take, please by all means do them so that you can come to my office and we can have a chance to go after whoever did the wrong thing to you and clear your name or get you whatever it ends up being, compensation or however we can do that. I don't have a chance to help you if you end up dead, and I don't want you to be dead. So please, but it starts with empathy, because I think if people get yelled at and say, hey, look, you know what's happening here, you could have prevented this, they become immediately defensive, and then the conversation is shut down, and then we get nowhere. So I try to, explain to them that when I'm talking about the ways that they can help themselves in these situations, it's not because I think what the officer's doing is okay. It's just that
Right.
I understand, right. And that, I think we can help.
Can I add one thing here? I think would be something I've thought of many times over the years would be helpful. I think that it should be perhaps a national event. I don't know if you want to call it a requirement or something, but to encourage that sometime, maybe in middle school, high school, whatever, people, as part of their classroom assignments, they go on ride-alongs with police officers. Maybe everybody in the country.
Wow, that's a great idea.
Or perhaps just 3 hours, whatever, and just to see what it's like to actually experience a police officer in a friendly setting, which a lot of people in certain communities have never had, and then to just see what they encounter and just to get that quick little experience that I've had many times. I think it would be great. Make it part of the high school curriculum or something.
I love that. And I just want to share how my view of all of this was affected. I don't even know if you know this, Ted, but when I was living in Encino, I was standing in front of my house next to my car, and cops came up, and two cops come out of a car. This was, and I was a white guy. I was in my mid-30s at the time. And they approached me with a lot of hostility, and they say, turn around. They take my arms and they cuff me. And I say, what is going on? Like that guy, like that lieutenant was saying to those officers in Virginia. I said, what is going on? And they say, shut up. And I go, I live here. And they go, shut up. Put your head, and they push me down on the front of my car, and I'm cuffed. And the anger that came up from me, because they wouldn't communicate, and this was obviously a mistake. And I said, my frickin' driver's license showing that I live here is in my pocket. Can you please take the driver's license out of my pocket? Shut up. We'll talk to you when we're ready to, right? And at that point, I just wanted to punch them in the face so I can understand how someone would have that reaction, right? But I'm glad it happened, because the feeling of helplessness and rage and claustrophobia and all of those things, kind of like what George Floyd may have felt, was just surging through me. And the truth was that there had been a report of somebody doing a burglary in the neighborhood who was wearing similar clothes to me. But it's like, can we just have a conversation? I live here. They wouldn't even have a conversation. So I think, I love what you're saying, that we need to have more tolerance and understanding of the perspective of the police, 100%. But we also need to fire people who are unnecessarily violent, who have poor communication skills, who have poor body language reading skills, who have some sort of racist past. I mean, any time you've got a cop who's got any sort of demonstrated racism, gone, right? So I think this is hopefully the silver lining in all of this, is that we can have a redefinition, and the name of this show is Redefining with Richard Greene. We can have a redefinition of what policing is, our relationship with police, and hopefully we can move forward. And yes, have police do good things in the neighborhood and develop a relationship so we can begin to understand that they are also human beings as well.
Right.
So
And
anyway,
that ride-along suggestion that I was talking about, that would actually work both ways, because the more police encounter people in the community, especially teenagers who are starting to be where the police are suspecting them of being criminals, the more they get to have positive, friendly encounters with them, maybe their attitudes towards the community they are policing will soften a bit, and they won't view everyone as just us versus them criminals.
And can I make a political comment? maybe Republicans, Mitch McConnell, Joe Manchin, it's time to actually start to have some level of gun legislation so that we have less guns and we have less people who should not be having guns because of better background checks, red flag laws, etc. We only have a couple more minutes. Yet Casey is saying hell yes on the gun. I mean, what the hell? All my friends who live outside the United States are saying, what kind of crazy Neanderthal yahoos are you guys in the United States, especially in your state of Texas, Kobe? Holy mackerel. I literally was in Texas doing a seminar, and one of the people who was organizing the seminar said that almost every man she knows has a gun. It's like,
so, but I think that's, particularly if you get it anywhere outside of the cities. I mean, folks in
forget
cities,
it. Forget about it.
No, it's a part of the culture here for sure.
Okay, real quick, we only have a couple minutes left. You guys are awesome. I love talking to fellow lawyers. You guys are real lawyers. I haven't practiced in a long time. So that's why I go to you. Talk about George Floyd. What's going to happen with Derek Chauvin? So here are the options, right? He gets acquitted of all three. There's a hung jury on all three, or he gets convicted of one of the three charges. I have some opinions on that. Would love to hear what you think.
I guess I'll take that first. I think that it's very easy toward the end of the prosecution's case, almost like watching a sports game where one team's had the ball and they're driving down the field.
Good point, man. I love what you're about to say.
Yeah, the other team
I don't love it, but I think you're right.
Well, I mean, the other team gets the ball, and I've been sitting in plenty of trials where towards the end of the prosecution's presentation, I thought to myself, how will we ever? Well, the defense will have a side as well, and people start feeling a different way then. So I think at this moment, I'd still be surprised if he got convicted. Not that I think that's right or wrong. I feel like this is the first time we're really trying these kinds of cases in such a heightened political environment. I worry about increasing statistics on hung juries. Traditionally, there aren't many hung juries because people get back there and they figure it out and they go home because they're tired of sitting through trials. But we are in a much more polarized world where things like crimes and trials are processed much more through people's political prism. And I see a society that is a one big hung jury all the time in every discussion we have. So I'm not going to say the smart money is on a hung jury because I don't think that's ever really true, but it wouldn't shock me if that ends up being the outcome here.
Holy mackerel. So you're saying, let's take a dollar bet. You're saying you think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a unanimous vote for acquittal. You're saying it's going to be a hung jury on all three counts.
Well, I certainly think it'll start there. The way juries end up working, Ed knows so much more about this than I ever could, but juries have a way of getting back there and working out their differences. And there usually are differences and they last for a very long time. It wouldn't surprise me if, given kind of what's going on here, people are more entrenched than they normally would and more committed to their particular interpretations. As we figured out yesterday with you and getting kind of attacked, people are having a hard time even agreeing on the general facts of what they're seeing because that's processed so much through politics. Not even taking that we can agree on the facts and have different interpretations of what they mean. People have a harder time today even agreeing on what they've seen.
Right, but I have to say, and I agree, because we all remember the Judge Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, and when Dr. Blasey Ford, was talking about how he had basically raped her when they were kids. Okay, it's over for him. And then he comes back he gets his time and he flips it around, right? So the game is not over until it's over. And we saw that, with the UCLA, what were they called? The high school, the college Final Four game, right? Anything can happen in the last minute. But I honestly, and again, I'm not a criminal lawyer, the prosecution case is devastating. The video is devastating. Holy mackerel. You're saying that we're not going to get 12 people to agree that to at least manslaughter.
That oftentimes we see sort of compromise verdicts. They happen every day, where people get back there and the way they resolve their differences are to compromise. Well,
how do you compromise? You only have two choices, right? You either vote to acquit or convict.
No, I mean compromise on a lesser included or on a lesser charge.
Oh, okay.
Right,
So
a lot of times what'll happen is they'll compromise and, we'll convict him, but we'll give him probation. Those things happen all the time. Those deals aren't supposed to be brokered back there, but we all know they happen. What will sometimes happen is we are just deadlocked on the question of murder 2. I guess they charged with murder 2 here. Well, how do we get out of this deadlock? Come on, guys, it can't be a hung jury. We got to come to something. And then everybody takes the temperature down a little bit and agrees, okay, well, everybody be okay if we convict him of murder 3 or whatever. That wouldn't surprise me either. So
okay, so what's our $1 bet? I'm betting that we get a conviction on manslaughter and that it is hung on murder 2 and 50-50 conviction on murder 3. Do we have a bet on that, or you agree with me?
I kind of agree with you, honestly. So
okay,
no bet. I think that's smart money where you're placing it there.
Okay. Plus, by the way, when this happened and I saw that video, I said this is murder 1. That's my personal belief, because after a couple minutes, I believe that was an intentional murder. Do you agree with me, Kobe?
The defense lawyer in me wants to say no. I think it's such an egregious act that when you see it on camera and what's going on there, to me, the most interesting issues here, and obviously the defense is headed down this path, is sort of the causation issues, and that's why they've gotten so much into Floyd's drug use and all that, to which people say, well, how is this relevant? You're putting the victim on trial. Well, yeah, the great Percy Foreman here in Houston said, put society on trial, put the victim on trial, put the prosecutor on trial. Certainly don't put your client on trial. That's been the strategy for anyone who knows what they're doing for forever. So,
right.
And that's what's going on here. Those issues I think will become more interesting as the defense gets into their case, which is, and that's going to make a lot of people very mad, as it should, because
yes.
It is a bit repulsive from a moral standpoint. Welcome to our job. A lot of what we often do in defending people morally becomes objectionable, but it is the right legal strategy because you end up focusing on the minutia of what a legal defense looks like.
Right.
So that's where they're headed.
So
right.
Here's why I feel confident about my $1 bet. When have you ever seen a beautifully eloquent, passionate chief of police testifying against his own officer? I think that's the game-changing element here.
Sure, and I think if I were the prosecutor, I'd focus in my closing on that. This isn't. We've got their own chief of police here telling you that this was wrong, that he did this and this and this and this and this.
Right. So if you want to be pro-police,
sure.
Right? If you want to be pro-police, right. be pro the chief of police, not Derek Chauvin. Would be my argument. Ed, what do you think?
Your comment about the evidence being devastating so far, I think that there's a large portion of the population of the country that feels that the evidence supporting Joe Biden having won the election is devastating. Yet a large number of people do not feel that it was devastating at all, and they don't believe it at all. And to talk about the chief of police situation, any Republican politicians who sort of admitted the truth that, yeah, it was a fair election and Joe Biden won, they were then seen as traitors. And in fact, they wanted to hang Mike Pence and all that. So you could have somebody who is just so pro law enforcement, so pro willing to excuse all the behavior and say, yeah, maybe he was a little excessive in what he did, but he was doing his job. And to convict
a little excessive?
I'm not saying this is my opinion. I want to make that
Jesus. Come on.
I am saying you can find people like that. Listen, I've done over 100 juries, and I've had whack jobs on juries that you just can't reason with them. And the rest of the jurors pulled their hair out and said, we couldn't get to this person, right? I'm sure you've had that too, Kobe. It's incredible what they will do. So to have one or two like that, I mean, I've said many times to you, it's really going to come down to the makeup of this jury. I don't know that exactly, but it is highly possible to be a hung jury.
Okay, we're over time, but we're going into overtime here. Are the jurors going to be factoring in the following? Two thoughts. One is, unless we vote to convict this guy, there are going to be riots all over the country. And I think that is without question. There are going to be more riots than Rodney King, than anything. I mean, the country is going to frickin' explode if he is acquitted, right? Or even if it's hung, because people will not understand that. That's number one. The other thing is, will the jurors, who are also human beings, be thinking, holy mackerel, at some point, people are going to know who I am. And my life will be in danger unless I vote to convict this guy.
I think the first one is something I've been thinking about some. The defense lawyer in me hates it. The idea that a guy is being tried essentially under the threat of an acquittal leading to the world burning again. I think we can all agree that's not particularly fair to a defendant, but he's put himself in that position.
Yes, he has.
Yes, he has. It's hard to feel bad for him, but it doesn't exactly strike you as something that should be affecting a hugely important criminal trial in America, but it will. Jurors even if jurors will, oftentimes jurors tell you one thing and you know for a fact that thing is not true, and they don't even know it's not true. They're human. It'll go into, even if they're not actively thinking about it, it will color sort of their decision making, particularly when the hard decisions have to be made. I don't know that jurors necessarily would fear for their personal safety. Maybe some would, some that are more risk averse. I think they probably have been made to feel so comfortable with the protections of the court and the formalities of the court. Ideally, I think this judge has been relatively fair and genteel. I would hope that they would feel comfortable that they would personally be safe.
Really?
Well, really? You would hope so.
You're 30 years old, you got another 40, 50 years to live. You've pissed off dozens of millions of people. They're going to find out who you are and where you live. Ed, what do you think? What do you think about that? Both those things.
Well, I know that I had a case involving the president of the Mongols motorcycle gang, who got into a barroom assault, and he really cut someone up pretty badly. And during the trial, there were some of the motorcycle gang people were around the courthouse, around this and that, and the jurors at the end of the case, almost every trial I've had, I've gone out and talked to the jurors in the hallway afterwards and had them stay around if they would, and most of them would, whether I've won or lost, and you talk to them and you learn. These people, the second they were released, I mean, I think they literally ran out of the courtroom, and then the defense attorney tried to release their personal information so that they could get an investigator to go talk to them to see if there was any kind of shenanigans or improper jury discussions or procedures that went on. And the jurors were terrified about that, and their information was not released. And I don't believe that the investigators ever were able to find out their identity and find them. I would sort of hope that would be the case, but this being the case that it is, and just this world attention on it, and the way technology is these days, and able to find people, it is riskier. So I'm sure that's going to factor into them to some extent.
Okay.
But again, you still might have one, two, or more who are just so passionate about their beliefs that they just say, this is what I'm going to do.
So the way I explain it, I am concerned even as we see the defense case, because it is going to be looking like we are shaming the victim, that we're making this all about how horrible George Floyd might have been and his imperfect life. This is what defense lawyers have to do, right, Kobe? And that the game here, people have to understand the game of criminal trials, which is the prosecution has to be 12 for 12. The defense only has to be 1 for 12. And I think as long as we keep that in mind, no matter what happens, at least there'll be an understanding. And I would suggest that if there is a hung jury, right, especially if it's hung on all 3, because you got 1 juror who's just on some sort of an ego trip, that immediately they refile and they go forward with a new trial. Do you see that happening?
I would think so. I've had the, I guess, pleasure of defending a couple folks along with the team that we work with, relatively high profile cases where we got a hung jury in federal court. They tried him again, won in federal court, and then the state came back and tried him in state court. Ended up going to the Supreme Court to discuss whether or not that could happen, double jeopardy issues, dual sovereignty issues coming up. Ended up trying again in state court. He ended up with a probation after all this, and still got 5 pending cases, and we're wondering whether or not they're going to try him on the 5 other ones. So I've seen it happen, and it's a case that was very much in the news. I don't know the politics of everything that goes on there in Minneapolis, but depending on how this ends, I can't imagine they just let it go. Because people would have questions. Those same people that would have questions of those jurors will have questions of their politicians, and they know where to find them.
Right. Ed, last comment. What do you think of that? Immediately, refile?
They would announce right away that they are going to seek to retry him. Yes. Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, especially if it's 11-1 or 10-2 or 4.
Right.
Absolutely.
So your prediction, Ed, the dollar bet, I'm saying conviction on manslaughter, 50-50 conviction on murder 2, probably not, on murder 3, probably not a conviction on murder 3. What do you think? Murder 2. Sorry.
It is very hard to say. It is hard for me to understand the mind of a juror that would not vote for at least the manslaughter, seeing what the evidence is. Okay, and I would also say that I have police officer friends who have told me that they think this is one case where the officer just went too far. I mean,
got it.
But so I would tend to agree. I think I'll agree. Yeah.
And I think that the officer who just resigned in Minnesota, who took out her gun instead of her taser, I think she is likely going to be brought up on manslaughter charges. That seems to me to be manslaughter, and she's in trouble, as she should be. So whether Matt Barnes is right that it was purposeful or subconsciously purposeful, you just can't, after 20 whatever years in the force, you just can't be taking out a gun and thinking it's a taser. Anyway, thank you guys. We could talk for a long time. It's fun, when lawyers get together. Kobe, you are my new best friend forever. Thank you for coming to my rescue on Facebook. Ed, I love you. Happy birthday. Casey, sorry we went so long, but please stay safe out there in Minneapolis. Casey, do you have any comments you want to make?
Yeah, Richard, I thought this chat today was great, man, and it's interesting seeing everybody's opinion on Facebook too, from both sides of the aisle. I think I mentioned to you that the police officer that shot Dante literally lives about 20 houses away from me.
Be careful. They're going to be people coming to get her.
It's I think they've learned a lot from the protests of George Floyd in an interesting way. We started getting alerts late last night about looking out for protesters, be mindful of protesters. They reserved some spots and some roads around my area for people to peacefully protest. There's curfews. I mean, there's cops on every single corner, just in the small neighborhood that I live in. So I would suspect that things will be pretty mellow tonight, especially after hearing how she resigned and that stuff too.
Right. Anyway, thank you guys. Important conversation. Hopefully, all of this conversation, all of the protests, all of the things coming to light with the trials and the body cams and the videos, we will evolve to a new definition, as I said, of policing, our relationship with communities of color, and we can move forward to form a more perfect union as our founding fathers hoped for. Thanks again. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Okay.